The smell hit me first. Not just smoke, but something deeper, something sickeningly sweet and acrid all at once. It was the smell of my life, my memories, everything I owned, turning into ash. I stood there frozen, in the middle of the yard, the flickering orange light dancing in my eyes like a demon's grin. It was happening. She was doing it, right there, in front of God and everyone, if anyone had bothered to look. The flames reached higher, licking at the evening sky, painting the familiar landscape of our backyard in shades of hellfire. I remember thinking, this isn't real. It was like a movie, a scene from some horror flick where the monster you knew, the one you trusted, suddenly turns on you. But the heat on my face was real. The crackling sound was real. The terrible, gut-wrenching understanding that this was my stuff, our stuff, going up in smoke, was terrifyingly real. There was a duffel bag, half open, spilling out what looked like my old high school yearbook. Pages curled, then blackened, then ignited, turning the smiling faces of my friends into a grotesque charade of agony. Next to it, a wooden crate, full of what I now recognized as my grandfather's fishing gear, the lures sparkling for a second before being consumed. I saw her then, standing a few feet away from the bonfire she had created. Her face was illuminated by the inferno, an expression I couldn't quite place. Was it triumph? Madness? Or just a cold, dead emptiness? She wasn't yelling, she wasn't crying. She was just watching, just like me, but with a different kind of intensity. Her hands were clasped in front of her, almost like she was praying to the fire. Her silhouette was sharp against the bright orange, a figure of pure destruction. My throat felt like sandpaper. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. It was like my vocal cords had seized up, refusing to acknowledge the horror unfolding. My mind was racing, trying to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. Why would she do this? We had problems, sure, every couple does. We argued, yes, sometimes big ones. But this was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. This was a complete violation, an act of pure, unadulterated malice. The smoke swirled around me, choking me. I stumbled back a step, then another, the heat pushing me away even as some twisted part of me wanted to run into the flames and grab back what was mine. But it was too late, so much was already gone. I saw the familiar outline of my old guitar case, the one my dad gave me for my 16th birthday, lying near the edge of the blaze. It was starting to warp, the wood groaning as it surrendered to the heat. That guitar had been with me through everything. Late night jams, open mic nights, even just quiet evenings strumming on the porch. It wasn't just an object, it was a part of my story, a part of my soul. And now it was a sacrifice to her rage. I finally found my voice. But it was just a whisper. What are you doing? It was a stupid question, obviously. The answer was right there, blazing in front of me. But it was the only thing I could think to say. She didn't respond. She didn't even look at me. Her gaze remained fixed on the roaring fire, as if mesmerized by the destruction. It was like I wasn't even there, like I was just another ghost in the smoke. My legs felt like jelly. I sank to my knees on the damp grass, watching, helpless. The flames grew, fueled by years of memories, boxes of photos, old letters, college textbooks, clothes, tools, things I had collected, things that had been given to me, things that defined who I was. Each crackle was a whisper of a lost moment. Each puff of smoke was a breath stolen from my past. The smell became even more potent, a sickening mix of burned fabric, paper, and plastic. It was a smell I knew I would never forget, a scent that would forever haunt my dreams. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. My first instinct was to call 911, to report a fire. But the rational part of my brain screamed, "No, not just a fire. It's arson. She's doing this." I swiped to the camera, my finger fumbling with the icon. I had to record this. Not just for proof, but because part of me couldn't believe it was real. I needed to see it through the lens, to distance myself from the immediate horror, to process it as something happening to me rather than by me. The shaky video began, capturing the horrific tableau, the roaring flames, the swirling smoke, and her standing there, a silent sentinel of destruction. This was the footage. This was what I would show the arson investigator. This was the undeniable proof of the day my life went up in smoke. And as the last light faded from my phone screen, replaced by the flickering orange glow, I knew my world would never be the same again. The sirens were a distant wail at first. Then they grew louder, closer, slicing through the night. It felt like an eternity had passed. But in reality, it had only been minutes since I started filming. The fire truck pulled up first, lights flashing, painting the scene in a dizzying strobe of red and blue. Then the police cruisers, their presence a stark reminder that this wasn't just an accident. This was a crime. 2 firefighters immediately jumped out, pulling hoses, their faces grim as they took in the towering inferno. The smell of burning rubber and plastic was overwhelming now, stinging my eyes. I could hear them barking orders, their voices muffled by their masks. One of them, a burly man with kind eyes, came over to me. "Are you all right, son?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. I just nodded, unable to speak. My eyes were still fixed on the shrinking pile of embers, where moments ago my entire life had resided. He put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of comfort that felt both alien and strangely grounding. Then the police approached. A woman officer, her face serious, and a man older with a weary look in his eyes. He introduced himself as Detective Miller, an arson investigator. "You call this in, sir?" he asked, his voice low and calm. I nodded again, still unable to form words. My throat felt like it was closing up. I finally managed a croak. "She did it." Pointed a shaky finger at the silhouette of my partner, who was now being gently led away by the woman officer. She offered no resistance, no struggle, just went quietly, her head bowed. The detective followed my gaze. "You have proof?" he asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. My hand automatically went to my pocket, pulling out my phone. "I filmed it," I whispered, holding it out to him. "Everything, from when it started." Took the phone carefully, his thumb swiping across the screen. He watched the shaky video, his expression unreadable, for what felt like an eternity. The sounds of the fire department spraying water, the hiss and steam, filled the air around us, a soundtrack to my nightmare. When the video ended, he looked up at me, his gaze intense. "This is very clear," he said, his voice flat. "Who is she?" "My girlfriend," I managed, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "My partner. We live here." He nodded slowly. "I see. And was there any reason for this?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Was there any reason? 1,000 reasons, maybe, or no reason at all. That was the horrifying part. I shook my head, tears finally starting to well up, blurring the already distorted world around me. "I don't know," I choked out. I don't know." The rest of the night was a blur of question. Detective Miller asked me about our relationship, about recent arguments, about anything that could have triggered such an act. I told him everything, stumbling over my words, trying to make sense of something that made no sense. I told him about our fight last week, about her growing mood swings, about the distance that had grown between us. But none of it felt like an explanation for this. None of it justified burning down my life. As the firefighters put out the last of the embers, the true scale of the devastation became clear. It wasn't just a pile of burnt stuff. It was a crater in the middle of our yard, a black smoking scar on the earth, bits of metal twisted into grotesque shapes. What used to be plastic melted into unrecognizable blobs. The air still smelled of char and destruction. I saw the melted remains of my dad's old toolbox, a gift from him just before he passed. That toolbox held memories, stories of him teaching me to fix things, of building birdhouses together. Now it was just a lump of fused steel and burnt wood. My collection of vinyl records, each one a piece of music history, a cherished memory of a concert or a gift from a friend, were now just warped, shiny puddles. The photo albums I had carefully curated since childhood, filled with pictures of family vacations, birthdays, graduations, all gone. My grandmother's quilt, hand-stitched with love, was nothing but charred threads. It wasn't just the monetary value, though that was immense. It was the irreplaceable sentimental value. It was my past, my heritage, my identity reduced to nothing. Each piece of debris was a stab to my heart. It felt like she hadn't just burned my things, she had burned a part of me. A part of my soul felt scorched and hollowed out. The detective eventually gave me his card, telling me they would take my phone as evidence, but would make a copy of the video for me. He told me they would be taking her to the station for formal questioning. "We'll be in touch," he said, his voice softer this time. "I am sorry for your loss, son. Loss. It was more than a loss. It was an annihilation." I stood there shivering, even though the air was still warm from the recent fire. The silence that followed the departure of the emergency vehicles was death. The moon shone down, casting long, distorted shadows across the desolate yard. My house, our house, seemed to loom behind me, cold and indifferent. It still stood, but everything outside it, everything that defined my inner world, was gone. And I was left alone, in the ashes of what used to be my life, with the horrifying knowledge that the person I loved had done this to me. The next day was a blur of police stations, cold coffee, and the sterile smell of disinfectant. Detective Miller had been true to his word. My partner, Sarah, was being held for questioning. They wanted me to come down, to give a formal statement, to clarify detail. It felt surreal, like I was an actor in a play I hadn't auditioned for, reciting lines I didn't understand. When I arrived at the station, the detective met me in a small interview room. He looked less weary than the night before, more focused. "She's in there now," he said, nodding towards a door down the hall. "She's denying it, says she didn't do it. My blood ran cold, denying it, after I showed him the footage." "But I filmed her," I said, my voice rising. "I literally filmed her standing next to the fire." "You saw it." He held up a hand. I know. We have the footage. It's strong evidence. But she's sticking to her story. Says you set the fire yourself for insurance money, and that you are trying to frame her." A wave of nausea washed over me. Frame her? Insurance money? I didn't even have insurance on most of that stuff. And even if I did, what kind of sick person burns their own memories, their own history? For money? The accusation felt like another stab, almost as painful as the fire itself. It was a complete distortion of reality, a sickening lie. "That's insane," I finally managed to say, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Why would I do that? My grandfather's fishing gear? My guitar? My photo albums? Does she know what she burned?" The detective just nodded. "We're trying to understand her mindset. She's not been very cooperative. We've got a public defender assigned to her. She's claiming emotional distress, saying she was hallucinating or something like that." Hallucinating? The audacity of it. I sat there, trying to process this new layer of deception. We had been together for 5 years. 5 years we had built a life, dreams, shared secrets. I thought I knew her. But this Sarah, the one who could stand there and watch my past burn, and then deny it, was a stranger. "Can I see her?" I asked, surprising myself. Part of me, a deeply wounded, foolish part, still wanted an explanation from her directly. I wanted to see if there was any flicker of the person I loved, any remorse, any pain in her eyes. The detective hesitated. "I wouldn't recommend it, but if you insist, it might make things more difficult for us legally if you are seen as pressuring her. But if you just want to observe..." "Just observe," I said, my voice hollow. I needed to see her face, to try and reconcile the woman I knew with the monster I had witnessed. He led me to a room with a one-way mirror. On the other side, in a stark, bare room, sat Sarah. Her hair was messy, her eyes a bit bloodshot, but there was a strange defiance in her posture. She was talking to a public defender, gesturing occasionally, her voice too low for me to hear. But I could see her lips moving, forming words I knew were lies. As I watched her, a knot of painful memories tightened in my chest. We had met at a coffee shop, both reaching for the same book. We laughed, we talked for hours, we fell in love. She was vivacious, smart, funny. She had a way of making me feel like I was the only person in the world. We had built a life together, step by step. We bought that house, filled it with our things, planned a future that now lay in ashes in the backyard. Over the past year, things had changed. Slowly at first, then more rapidly. She became more withdrawn, prone to fits of anger, then deep bouts of sadness. Our arguments became more frequent, more intense. She would accuse me of things, irrational things, then apologize profusely the next day. I tried to talk to her, to get her to see a therapist, to understand what was going on. She always brushed it off, saying she was stressed, overworked, that she just needed more time. I tried to be patient, to be supportive, to believe in the woman I loved. But I never saw this coming. Never in my darkest nightmares did I imagine she would burn my life down. As I watched her through the glass, her face contorted in an expression of false innocence. A cold realization settled in my gut. The person I loved was gone. This was someone else, someone cruel and manipulative. The betrayal was a physical ache, deep in my bones. She stood up suddenly, turning towards the mirror, almost as if she sensed my presence. My heart leaped into my throat. Her eyes scanned the glass, and for a terrifying second I thought she saw. A chilling smile played on her lips, a smile that held no warmth, no love, only a strange, unsettling malice. It was a look that screamed, "You think you won. You think you know me." It was a look that made me question everything I thought I knew about her, about us. And in that moment, I knew for certain that she was a stranger. We had been together for 5 years, and for the first 3, it felt like a dream. Sarah was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Brilliant, witty, adventurous. We traveled, we hiked, we cooked elaborate meals together. Our own house, the one she now stood accused of defiling, was our sanctuary. We spent weekends gardening, painting walls, turning it into a home that truly felt like ours. But then, slowly, subtly, cracks began to form in the perfect facade. It started small. She would get upset over minor things, blow them out of proportion. A misplaced car key, a forgotten grocery item. These would trigger disproportionate reactions, shouts, and accusations that were completely out of character. I'd try to reason with her, but it was like talking to a brick wall. Her eyes would glaze over, and she'd say things, hurtful things, that I knew she didn't really mean, or at least I hoped she didn't. Then came the mood swings. One day she'd be ecstatic, full of energy and plans, showering me with affection. The next, she'd be withdrawn, sullen, refusing to leave the bed, sometimes not even speaking to me for hours. I tried to be understanding, to give her space. I thought maybe it was work stress, or something going on with her family that she wasn't telling me about. I suggested therapy, gently, multiple times. Each time she'd either laugh it off, saying she was fine, or get angry, accusing me of thinking she was crazy. The arguments grew more frequent and more intense. They weren't just about small things anymore. They were about everything and nothing. Money, our future, my friends. Her friends. Even the way I loaded the dishwasher. One particular fight, about a month before the fire, really stood out. I had bought tickets to a concert, a band we both loved. I surprised her with them, thinking it would lift her spirits. Instead, she exploded. She accused me of being controlling, of not respecting her time, of forcing her to do things she didn't want to do. I was stunned. All I wanted was to cheer her up. That night, she slept on the couch, and the silence between us felt like a chasm. She started disappearing for hours, sometimes a full day, without explanation. When she returned, she'd be evasive, sometimes smelling faintly of alcohol, though she claimed she wasn't drinking. She'd say she needed space, that I was smothering her. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, constantly trying to anticipate her moods, to avoid another outburst. The happy, loving woman I knew was slowly being replaced by someone I barely recognized. Someone unpredictable and volatile. I remember talking to my best friend Mark about it. He listened patiently, then said, "Man, that sounds rough. Are you sure you are okay? She sounds like she's going through something serious, but you can't let her drag you down with her." I brushed him off, defending her, saying it was just a phase, that she needed me. I was so convinced that with enough love and patience, I could help her find her way back. A week before the fire, we had a massive argument. It started because I found an empty bottle of liquor hidden in the back of her closet. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. Instead, she flipped. She started yelling, blaming me for all her problems, for making her feel trapped, for not understanding her. She said I was selfish, that I never listened. It escalated quick. She started throwing things, small things at first, then bigger ones. A vase shattered against the wall. A book flew past my head. I'd never seen her like that. I tried to calm her, to hold her, but she pushed me away with surprising strength. "Get out," she screamed, her face contorted with rage. "Just get out of my life." "I hate you." I was shell-shocked. I grabbed my keys and left, driving around for hours, not knowing where to go. I ended up at Mark's place, crashing on his couch. He just listened, offering me a beer, letting me vent until the early hours of the morning. I told him I thought it was over. This was it. I couldn't take it anymore. The next morning, I went home. She was gone. Her car was missing. I thought she had left for good. I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. The house was quiet, too quiet. I spent the day trying to process everything, the weight of the last few months finally crushing me. I started thinking about my future, about what I needed to do. I even looked up a few apartments online, thinking about moving out, giving her space, giving myself space. She returned late that night. She was subdued, quiet. She didn't apologize, not directly. She just looked at me, her eyes empty, and said, "I need to clear my head. Some things need to change." I thought she meant us, our relationship. I thought she meant she wanted to work on things, maybe even seek help. I was so naive, I thought she meant her changing. I never once considered that clearing her head meant setting my entire life on fire. The things that needed to change were apparently everything I owned. That was the last conversation of any real substance we had before the world ignited. The immediate days after the fire felt like living in a fog. My home, once a place of comfort and joy, now felt like a mausoleum. The backyard, where we used to barbecue and laugh, was a stark reminder of the night's devastation. Every time I stepped outside, the smell of char and damp ash still lingered. A constant, cruel reminder. I couldn't escape it. It permeated my clothes, my hair, even my skin. I realized very quickly how much I had lost, not just physically, but practically. I had no clothes other than what I was wearing. No toothbrush, no toiletries. My wallet thankfully had been in my pocket, but everything else, every single personal item that makes up a life, was gone. It was like I had been wiped clean, my slate erased, but not in a liberating way. It was a horrifying void. Friends and family rallied around me. Mark let me stay at his place. My sister, Sarah, not the Sarah thankfully, drove up from out of state with a bag of clothes and toiletries. They offered comfort, listening patiently to my fragmented recounting of the nightmare, but their faces were etched with a mixture of pity and disbelief. No one could truly understand the depth of the violation, the specific pain of having your memories deliberately incinerated by someone you love. The insurance company was a labyrinth of forms and phone calls. Turned out our homeowner's policy covered the structure of the house, but my personal belongings were severely underinsured. It was a mistake I bitterly regretted now. Process felt cold, bureaucratic, completely detached from the raw emotional reality of what had happened. They needed itemized lists, estimated values, proof of ownership. How do you put a value on a childhood photograph? How do you replace the feeling of holding your grandfather's fishing rod? Every time I tried to list items, I'd remember something else. Another cherished possession, and the fresh wave of grief would hit me. The antique desk I inherited from my aunt. Each memory was a little shard of glass in my heart. It wasn't just stuff. It was the physical manifestation of my life story, erased in a single hateful act. The legal process began to grind forward, slowly, relentlessly. Sarah was formally charged with arson. Her public defender immediately began to build a defense based on her mental state, claiming she was not in her right mind, that she suffered from severe emotional distress. I kept thinking about her face through the one-way mirror, that chilling smile. Did that look belong to someone not in their right mind? Or was it the calculating sneer of someone who knew exactly what they were doing? I had to get a lawyer too, to represent my interests as the victim. It felt like another layer of financial and emotional strain. The thought of facing her in court, of reliving that night, filled me with dread. But I knew I couldn't back down. I had to see this through, not just for myself, but for every memory she tried to destroy. One afternoon I went back to the house alone, needing to just sit in the emptiness to try and process. I walked around the black crater in the yard, picking through the ash with a stick. Most of it was unrecognizable, but then I saw it. A small ceramic shard, painted with a familiar pattern. It was a piece of the mug my sister had made for me in elementary school, inscribed with "Best Brother." It was just a tiny fragment, barely an inch long, but it was enough. Enough to bring a fresh torrent of tears. I picked it up carefully, the edges still sharp, and clutched it in my hand. It was the only tangible piece of my past that remained. As I sat there, cradling the shard, a cold wind picked up, rustling through the still-standing trees. I felt a sudden sense of being watched. I looked up, scanning the street, but saw no one. It was probably just my imagination, a byproduct of the trauma. But the feeling lingered, an unsettling prickle on my skin. I wondered if she was out on bail, if she was nearby, if she was watching me, relishing the pain she had caused. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I was homeless, broken, and now paranoid. The weight of it all was crushing. I wasn't just grieving for what was lost. I was grieving for the person I used to be. The person who wasn't constantly looking over their shoulder. The person who believed in love and trust. That person had also gone up in smoke. The question why became an incessant hum in my mind. It followed me everywhere, echoing in the quiet moments, screaming at me in my nightmares. Why would someone burn down the life they shared with another person? Why would Sarah, the woman I loved, do something so devastating, so utterly senseless? Detective Miller, despite his professional distance, seemed to understand my need for answers. Couldn't share everything, but he did give me glimpses into Sarah's behavior during her questioning. She's very volatile, he explained during one of our meetings. One moment she's quiet and withdrawn, the next she's yelling, accusing everyone, including us, of being against her. She alternates between denying everything and then vague, almost poetic statements about cleansing or new beginnings. Cleansing. That word struck me. It connected with what she'd said the last time we spoke, about clearing her head. Was this her version of a fresh start? Burning down everything that tied her to me, to our past, to the life we built. It was a chilling thought, a twisted, destructive form of self-help. I started digging, not in any official way, but just remembering, trying to piece together the fragments of our life, looking for clues I might have missed. I remembered her grandmother had a history of mental illness, something Sarah rarely talked about, always dismissing it as just a bit eccentric. I remembered a story she told me once about her childhood, about a fire that had damaged her family home when she was very young. She had barely escaped, and the experience had clearly traumatized her. Could that have been a trigger? A deep-seated trauma manifesting in this horrific way? Her lawyer's strategy became clearer with each passing week. Sarah was mentally unstable. They were going for an insanity plea, or at least a diminished capacity defense. It felt like a betrayal all over again. Not only had she destroyed my property and violated my trust, but now she was trying to escape accountability by claiming illness. And while I knew she had been struggling, the cold malice I saw in her eyes, the calculating denial, didn't fit with the image of someone completely out of touch with reality. I spoke to our mutual friends, cautiously trying not to spread gossip, but seeking understanding. Most were as shocked as I was. A few admitted they had noticed changes in Sarah's behavior too. One friend, Lisa, confided in me. She seemed so paranoid sometimes, Lisa said, her voice low. She'd text me late at night asking if I thought you were cheating, or if I knew you were talking behind her back. It was really strange. I tried to tell her you loved her, that you would never do that. Cheating? My stomach churned. I had always been faithful, completely devoted to her. The thought that she was fabricating these delusions, using them to justify her own actions, was infuriating. It wasn't just paranoia. It was a complete unraveling of her perception of reality, or a deliberate attempt to rewrite. One evening I found myself going through old photos on my phone, the ones that hadn't been burned. There were so many of us, happy, smiling, full of life. In one picture taken just last year, Sarah was laughing, her head thrown back, her eyes sparkling. She looked so genuinely joyful. What had happened to that person? Where had she gone? I thought about the night of the fire again. The specific items she had chosen to burn. It wasn't random junk. It was my sentimental stuff. The things that meant the most to me, that were unique to me. My history, my passions. My grandfather's fishing gear, my guitar, my vinyl collection, my photo albums. It was a targeted attack, a deliberate attempt to erase my identity, to strip me bare. This wasn't just a breakdown. It felt like an act of calculated cruelty, intended to inflict maximum pain. The arson investigator mentioned something in passing that stuck with me. Sometimes, he said, when people feel trapped or out of control in their own lives, they lash out in destructive ways. Burning something can feel like an ultimate act of control, a way to reshape their world, even if it's destructive. Was she feeling trapped? By our relationship? By her own issues? Was this her way of breaking free by destroying everything around her? The more I tried to understand, the more complex and painful it became. It wasn't a simple why. It was a web of declining mental health, possible underlying trauma, paranoia, and a terrifying inability to cope in a healthy way. And at the center of it all was me, the victim of her devastating outburst, left to pick up the pieces of a life she had purposefully set ablaze. The realization that I might never truly understand the depth of her motives or find a satisfactory answer to why was a heavy burden, a constant ache in my chest. It felt like the ashes of my belongings were also the ashes of all the questions I had. Courtroom was a cold, impersonal place, filled with hushed whispers and the rustle of papers. It smelled faintly of stale coffee and fear. My own lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a man with a kind face and a sharp legal mind, sat beside me. He had warned me about what to expect. Delays, legal maneuvers, the slow, grinding pace of justice. But nothing could truly prepare you for the reality of it. Sarah was there, sitting at the defense table with her public defender. She looked different again. Her hair was neatly pulled back. She wore a simple dark suit. She looked almost normal, almost like the Sarah I used to know. But her eyes, whenever they flickered towards me, were still empty, devoid of emotion, or perhaps filled with an emotion I couldn't comprehend. Not sadness, not regret. Just a cold, flat gaze. The arraignment was brief. The charges were read: arson, destruction of property. Her lawyer entered a plea of not guilty, citing mental health issues. I watched her, my stomach churning. How could she stand there and lie, knowing what I had seen, knowing what I had filmed? Mr. Henderson leaned over. "They're going to push for a psychiatric evaluation," he whispered. "Try to get her committed or placed in a facility instead of prison. It's a common strategy in cases like this." The thought of her potentially walking away, or getting a light sentence, made my blood boil. It felt like an insult to the irreparable damage she had done. I wasn't seeking revenge, not exactly, but I needed justice. I needed her to be held accountable for her actions, for the pain she had inflicted. The pre-trial hearings stretched on for months. Each session was a new layer of psychological torture. Her lawyer would present arguments about her unstable mental state, about her history of anxiety and depression. They brought up the childhood fire, trying to paint a picture of deep-seated trauma that had finally, tragically manifested. I sat there listening to the dissection of her life, and by extension, my own. It felt like our relationship, our love, was being put on trial, stripped bare and analyzed by strangers. I had to relive the night of the fire countless times, recounting every detail to lawyers, to the prosecutor, to the police. Each retelling dragged me back to that backyard, to the smell of burning memories, to the sight of her standing there, silent and destructive. It was exhausting, emotionally draining, leaving me hollowed out and aching. The victim impact statement was the hardest part. Mr. Henderson had advised me to write it, to put into words the full extent of the emotional, psychological, and financial damage. I sat for hours, trying to articulate the devastation. How do you quantify the loss of a photograph of your deceased grandmother? How do you explain the feeling of losing your sense of safety in your own home? I wrote about the specific items, the guitar, the fishing gear, the photo albums. I wrote about the sleepless nights, the nightmares, the constant anxiety. I wrote about the betrayal, the crushing blow of realizing the person you loved could do something so malicious. It felt like tearing open my chest and letting everyone see the raw, bleeding wound inside. During one of the hearings, Sarah's lawyer tried to discredit my testimony, suggesting I had exaggerated the severity of our arguments, or that I had somehow provoked her. My jaw tightened. It was a desperate tactic, a deflection. I kept my gaze fixed on the judge, refusing to let her lawyer's words get to me. Mr. Henderson quickly shut down their attempts, but the sting of the accusation lingered. I remember one particular afternoon, as the lawyers were arguing procedural matters, Sarah looked over at me. Our eyes met across the courtroom. For a brief second, something flickered in her gaze. Not anger, not coldness, but something almost like a plea. Or was it just exhaustion? I couldn't tell. Then her lawyer leaned over and whispered something to her, and the mask was back. Her face once again impassive. The brief connection, if it even was one, was severed. The whole process felt like a cruel irony. I was the victim, yet I felt like I was constantly defending myself, justifying my pain. And she, the perpetrator, was trying to find an escape clause, to be seen as a victim of her own mind. It was a frustrating, dehumanizing experience. As the trial date loomed closer, the weight of it all grew heavier. I knew that no matter the outcome, no matter the verdict, the scars of that night would remain. And the question lingered, even if justice was served, could any legal decision truly heal the wounds she had inflicted? Could it bring back what was lost? I doubted it. Months turned into a year. The legal process dragged on, slowly, painfully. I had moved back into my house, the one she hadn't burned down, but it felt hollow. Every room echoed with memories, both good and bad. The backyard, where the fire had raged, was now a patch of new grass, but the dark earth beneath still felt like a wound. I tried to plant flowers there, to bring life back, but it felt like a futile gesture. The constant reminders were exhausting. I'd open a drawer, expecting to find a specific shirt, only to remember it was gone. I'd go to grab a tool, a book, a photo album, and the memory of the fire would hit me like a physical blow. The smell of wood smoke, even from a distant bonfire, would trigger an instant wave of nausea and panic. I found myself checking the locks constantly, jumping at every unfamiliar noise. Trust, a fundamental part of life, had been shattered. Not just trust in others, but in my own judgment, in my own ability to discern danger. My sleep became erratic. Nightmares plagued me. Vivid replays of the fire, her silent figure silhouetted against the flames, the roaring sound in my ears. Sometimes I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I smelled smoke, even when there was none. Therapy helped, slowly. My therapist told me it was normal, a form of PTSD. She helped me develop coping mechanisms to ground myself when the anxiety became overwhelming. But it was a long, arduous journey. The community's reaction was mixed. Some friends were incredibly supportive, always checking in, inviting me over, offering practical help. Others seemed uncomfortable, unsure how to react to such a raw public display of betrayal. Some people whispers reached me, wondered if there was more to the story, if I had somehow provoked her. The judgment, even imagined, felt like another burden. How could people think I deserved this? How could they even consider it? I tried to rebuild. I bought new clothes, new tools, new household items, but it all felt generic, soulless. None of it carried the history, the personal touch of what was lost. I even bought a new guitar, a beautiful acoustic, but it didn't feel the same. It was just an object, not an extension of my soul like the old one had been. Playing it felt like a betrayal of the burned instrument, of the memories it held. There were moments of profound despair, days when I couldn't get out of bed, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of everything. The loss of possessions was one thing, but the loss of trust, the loss of shared future, the loss of a person I thought I knew, that was the hardest. I felt truly alone despite the support of my friends and family. The intimacy of betrayal was a unique kind of loneliness. I remember one particularly dark evening. I was sitting in the living room, the house silent and dark, except for the glow of the streetlights outside. I felt the tears welling up, hot and heavy. It wasn't just sadness. It was an emptiness that resonated deep within me. My life felt like a broken record, skipping over the same painful groove again and again. I had tried so hard to be strong, to push through, but in that moment, I felt utterly defeated. What was the point? What was left to fight for? The ceramic shard from my sister's mug, the only tangible relic of my past that I'd managed to salvage, sat on my bedside table. I picked it up, running my thumb over the smooth, cool surface. It was so small, so insignificant, yet it held so much meaning. It was a reminder of innocence, of family, of a time before the fire. It was a tiny beacon in the overwhelming darkness. In that moment of raw vulnerability, clutching the shard, I realized something. This wasn't just about what I had lost, it was about what I still had. My own life, my own resilience, my own capacity to feel and to heal. It wasn't about getting back what was gone. It was about building something new, something stronger, out of the ashes. The pain was still there, a constant companion, but it was also a testament to what I had survived. And that, I realized, was a powerful truth. A small, faint flicker of hope in the vast, echoing darkness. The day of the verdict arrived with a heavy, oppressive silence. I sat in the courtroom, my heart pounding in my chest, a cold knot of dread and anticipation in my stomach. Sarah was there, too, her face impassive, almost serene. Her lawyer sat beside her, whispering last-minute reassurances. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, gave my arm a reassuring squeeze. "No matter what happens," he murmured, "you've shown incredible strength through all of this." The judge entered, and the courtroom fell completely silent. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and rapid. The judge's voice was calm, methodical, as she began to read the verdict. She recounted the evidence, the testimonies, the psychiatric reports. Every word felt like a physical blow, reliving the nightmare, the betrayal, the painful memories. She spoke about the undeniable evidence, the footage I had captured. She acknowledged the defense's arguments about mental distress, but stated that while Sarah's mental state was certainly a factor, it did not fully absolve her of responsibility for the deliberate act of arson. The judge stated that the fire was a malicious, premeditated act, designed to cause significant emotional and material harm. Then came the words I had been waiting for, dreading, hoping for. Sarah Miller on the charge of arson in the 2nd degree. We find you guilty. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. My breath hitched. Guilty. The word resonated in my ears, bringing a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. It wasn't joy, not triumph. Just a profound sense of validation. Justice. Sarah didn't react immediately. Her face remained blank, her eyes fixed on the judge. Then slowly a tear traced a path down her cheek. Not a sob, not a breakdown, just a single silent tear. Her lawyer put a hand on her arm, his face grim. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for a few weeks later. Prosecutor argued for a significant prison sentence, citing the severity of the crime, the destruction of property, and the emotional trauma inflicted. Sarah's lawyer pleaded for leniency, emphasizing her mental health issues and requesting a sentence that included mandatory psychiatric treatment in a secure facility, rather than a traditional prison. I had prepared myself for this. I knew the system wasn't perfect. I knew mental health was a complex issue, but I also knew the malice behind her action. I stood up, taking a deep breath, and read my victim impact statement. My voice trembled at first, then grew stronger as I recounted the devastating loss, the sleepless nights, the violation of trust. I spoke about the guitar, the photos, the sentimental items that could never be replaced. I looked at Sarah as I read, meeting her gaze. This time there was no smile, no cold defiance. Just that single tear, and a flicker of something I couldn't name. Perhaps shame, perhaps despair. The judge listened intently. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. She then delivered the sentence. Sarah was sentenced to several years in prison, with a significant portion of that sentence contingent upon mandatory psychiatric evaluation and treatment. She would also be ordered to pay restitution for the damages, though I knew that was unlikely to ever fully cover my losses. It wasn't a perfect outcome. It wasn't the dramatic cinematic justice I might have fantasized about, but it was accountability. It was a recognition of the wrong that had been done. As the bailiffs led Sarah away, she turned one last time. Her eyes met mine. This time there was no smile, no defiance, no accusation. Just a deep, profound sadness, a look that finally acknowledged the wreckage she had caused. And in that moment, I saw a flicker of the person I once knew, the person who had been lost long before the fire. Leaving the courthouse, the air felt lighter, almost breathable. The media was there, of course, a flurry of cameras and questions, but I simply walked past them, feeling utterly drained. The verdict was in. The legal battle was, for the most part, over. But the aftermath, the emotional battle, was just beginning. I knew the scars would always remain, a permanent reminder of the day my life went up in smoke. Standing there, in the fresh air, I also felt a small, fragile sense of peace. The future was still uncertain, still daunting. But for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I could finally begin to look forward, even with the weight of the past still heavy on my shoulders. 2 years have passed since the fire. 2 years since my life as I knew it turned to ash. The house feels like a home again, slowly, painstakingly rebuilt with new memories. The backyard where the fire once roared is now a small garden, bursting with color. I planted a small oak sapling in the center of where the fire pit used to be. A symbol of growth, of resilience, of a future rising from the scorched earth. The legal process is truly over. Sarah is in prison, receiving the psychiatric treatment she needs. I get occasional updates from the state, brief reports on her progress. I don't visit her. I don't write. I don't feel the need for closure from her directly anymore. The verdict, the acceptance of justice, that was my closure. The restitution, as expected, has been minimal. The money can never replace what was lost. But that's okay, I've come to terms with it. The material things I've learned are just things. They can be replaced or lived without. What truly matters are the memories, and those, I've realized, can't be burned. They exist within me, in my heart, in my mind, untouchable by flame. I still have flashbacks, the occasional nightmare, but they are less frequent, less intense. The smell of smoke no longer sends me into a full-blown panic attack. It's progress, slow but steady. I've started playing guitar again on the new one. Took a long time to feel comfortable with it, to make it truly mine. But now, it feels good. It's a new sound, a new beginning. I've picked up photography again too, but I am more careful now, backing up every single image, learning from the past. I've learned to appreciate the ephemeral nature of life, the beauty of the moment, knowing that nothing is truly permanent. My relationship with Mark and my sister has grown stronger. They were my anchors through the storm, and I am eternally grateful for their unwavering support. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, even when I felt completely adrift. I've also connected with others who have experienced similar traumas, finding solace and understanding in shared experiences. It's a strange club to be a part of, but here is comfort in knowing you are not the only one. Trust is still a work in progress. It's hard to open up, to let people in when you've been so deeply betrayed, but I am trying. I've learned that not everyone is capable of such destruction, and that it's unfair to punish new people for the actions of one. It's a slow healing process, like a scar fading over time, still visible, but no longer raw. Looking at the little oak sapling in the garden, I see a reflection of myself. It's young, still growing, but its roots are deep. It stands firm, despite the scorched earth beneath. I think about the person I was before the fire, and the person I am now. The fire stripped me bare, forcing me to confront my vulnerabilities, my pain, my resilience. It forced me to rebuild, not just my physical surroundings, but myself. I am stronger now, more aware, more grateful for the simple things, for the people who truly care. I don't know if I'll ever truly forgive Sarah, maybe not in the traditional sense. But I've learned to let go of the anger, the bitterness. Holding on to it only hurts me, not her. I've accepted that what happened, happened. It's a part of my story now, a dark chapter, but not the end of the book. The future is unwritten. I am still figuring things out day by day, but I am not lost anymore. I am not defined by what was burned, but by how I chose to rise from the ashes. And as the sun sets over my new garden, casting long shadows across the young oak tree, I feel a quiet sense of peace. The hearth may have been broken, but the home and the heart within it have been rebuilt, stronger and more resilient than ever before.